Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. If this works, amazing. If this doesn't work, shame.
Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to week 4 of Filter Through Skin. I'm here with FADUMA MOHAMED, poet extraordinaire, storyteller, theater extraordinaire, arts educator, activist, all around decent human being. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you for your time. Love you too. For those of you who will be seeing this in the great future, this is a program I'm running to help Black writers learn to write outside of the confines given to us by Western society. We're taught to propagate our pain and to lift up our pain and never talk about our personhood, never talk about our humanity. And so we're hoping that through this workshop series that you gain the ability to kind of look at different ways you can write about yourself as a human being, write about your Blackness as a human being, and to enjoy yourself in the fullness of yourself. Did you want to give yourself a quick introduction?
Yes. Are you going to hold it for me or should I hold it?
You know what? We're going to take no chances. I'll hold it for you.
Okay, awesome. You don't have to though.
Okay.
But I love you. All right. Let's get into the good stuff. So my name is FADUMA MOHAMED. I guess one of the ways that I introduce myself nowadays is say I'm an occasional teacher by day and an artist and writer by night. I'm really, really interested in looking at, well, how can we talk about love and give meaning to love through our writing? That's kind of where I'm at right now. But a lot of my previous work was on family and grief, and with my experience being a sibling of autism, with the plays that I've written, kind of writing about from a kind of a biographical perspective, but growing roots into the imaginative. So how do we take parts of our real lives, but not write in a way where we mimic our lives, but kind of give a new reality to the lives of our greatest hopes and dreams? Yeah.
Bars. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm an educator and a writer, and trying my best to balance the two.
Dope. All right. So to give context to the workshop, this workshop is called Love Sans or Love Avec Tragedy. And the reason I wanted to do this workshop is because we so often frame love to be, especially as Black people, a painful thing, in as much as we frame it to be a beautiful thing. And it saddens me sometimes because we're so focused on death and passing and grief that we often forget to focus on the miracle that is life. And I don't believe that's true of Black culture. I believe that's true of Black writing and of Black art a lot of the time, where we don't get to focus, especially as poets and as storytellers, we don't get to focus on the beautiful things, the beautiful thing that is our lives. And so I wanted to ask the questions, how do we write about love? So this isn't a question for you, just because it's a lot. How do we write about love? How do we write about love without also looking to despair? How do we, when love turns to grief, write about despair in a way that honors the love that is gone or the relationships that are gone? I wanted to ask, what can we write about love, whether it's about ourselves, loving ourselves? Is it about, how do we write about loving our families? How do we write about loving our communities? How do we write about loving each other, obviously, our romantic partners, all the things that come into our life that deserve love? How do we write about those things in a way that honors our Blackness, in a way that honors our relationship? And so my first question for you is, when you write about love, where's the first place you go to?
Ooh. Wow. Okay.
You can hold it.
All right. We're gonna trust that the mic is going to work. Lately, I have been doing my best to kind of sit in either the love or the lovelessness or the desire for love or whatever it is that my body is craving for or feeling in the moment. So I think I write immediately. The first place I go to is, well, how am I feeling right now? and what's true to me right now in this moment. There are times where I might feel like there's two versions of my writing. There's the writing where I know, oh yeah, this is something that I feel confident in being able to hold space with others through this kind of writing. And then there's the writing that I'm like, ooh, this is literally only for me. But I think for most of us, there's no being able to write as an offering unless we are first able to offer to ourselves. And so
This is there's recurringness in this. So thank you for saying that again.
yeah. So I think I come back first to me and how am I feeling? And then after, the writing is complete, I kind of sort through, well, what writing is for me and me only, and what writing can I hold with community?
Word. That's dope. That's dope. That's dope. I'm gonna hold that. My next question would be, this is gonna seem so disjointed to you guys when you see it, but please know that I'm doing this out of love. We're trying not to lose this beautiful interview to technology. My next space would be, so you started writing about love, and we're gonna stick with Sans tragedy for now. We'll go to Avec tragedy after. You start writing about the people in your life that you love. We'll start with, you know what, we'll go there. We'll start with romantic love and like feelings of attraction to people and navigating that stuff. As you start writing, how do you engage with those feelings in a way that, like, because cliche is so necessary when writing about love, but how do you like dip out of spaces of cliche to like write about your genuine feelings in a moment and capturing that so that it's not necessarily generic? Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
First of all, great question. I think all of us as writers at one point or another have reflected on our writing and is like, shit, is this too corny?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I think cliches are cliche for a reason.
I agree.
You know what I mean? They are our lives, and cliches are the ways that we capture meaning so that everyone is able to remember it. And so I'm not even gonna act like I got that part all figured out. I definitely really struggle with corniness. You all, when you were writing about love, at one point or another, you might be like, shit, is this too corny? But I say, who cares? At least in the beginning stages of it. Yeah. I think Lillian Allen, she says, write for yourself and then edit for others. And I love that so much because it's like, if you write for yourself first, you can edit for the corniness later. You can edit for the cliches later. But I think, again, you need to get it out on paper first, because I think my therapist always says the longest distance is the distance between your heart and your mind. And it's the longest distance. Distance. And I'll add, I think with creatives and writers, the longest distance is our mind to our pen. It's like, well, how do we get from that huge hurdle from our heart to our mind and then our mind to paper without judging ourselves? Love is not meant for judgment. Yeah. And if you're really and truly writing from a place of love, for love, with love, then a part of that process is not writing with judgment in mind. Yeah. Again, coming back to this idea of writing for ourselves and then our others, where if I always considered my audience, I don't think I would have that many poems. Yeah. They're a crucial part of it. Yeah. And because especially in the realm of romantic love, as writers, we're giving meaning to love. We're giving meaning to romance. We're giving meaning to hope. But then we're also doing our best to say, okay, here is our ideas of love. What do you take from this? And not only that, how do you bring this version of love into your own personal lives? How do you love better? How do you feel better? How do you be more vulnerable? How do you be more honest? How do you be more vulnerable? And the hope is, at least in my writing, is that I'm offering love so that you could love better.
Okay, I'm going to stop really quickly. I'm going to ask a quick follow-up question because you said something that really caught my attention and I want to dig into it a little bit. You said when we're writing about love, we're giving love meaning. And I think we feel like love already has such a distinction, but when we're writing in English, love is such an arbitrary, abstract, kind of out there word. It's one of those all-encompassing things that we do. So, like, can you break down a little bit for me what you mean by give meaning to love?
Yes.
As we're writing about romance.
So one of the things that I think about when I think about giving meaning to love is it's not just giving words, but it's bringing essence to it, bringing life to love. Especially I don't want to call the way of the world right now a world of lovelessness, but we are a society of people constantly reconfiguring what love is. Some people think that, I don't know, I think we have a misconstrued idea of love sometimes, especially around people our age.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so bringing essence to this word that means so much, bringing meaning to it is being able to look at love and being like, I don't understand you, but I'm willing to do the work to understand you. And I'm willing to bring that understanding to others and then kind of figure you out in the eyes of others. I think that's what bringing meaning to love is.
I'm gonna hold that. Let's go. Okay. So now that we've gotten those incredibly dope answers, I'm very, very grateful. My next question for you would be, how do we write about familial love? And I ask this as someone who has I have very complex history writing about family. That's brought about conflict in my family. That's brought about strife and strain on a relationship. And I've also written about family in ways that have brought us closer together. And so there's a fine line that I'm still figuring out.
Fine line.
So for you, how do you navigate writing about familial love?
Phenomenal question, and I'm proud of you for still sharing the story and dealing with the rewards and the consequences as it came. This is a very difficult question for me because it's something that I often do talk about, and it's showing up in my new writing too. But in my new writing, there's kind of more hope, whereas in my old writing, there's a lot of grief. And it's still like I'm 30 years old and still dealing with all this grief because like the grief doesn't leave you, but I think one thing I really try to do with the writing is like, okay, I have grief on my left hand and then I have love on my right hand, and let me walk with both of them together. In terms of familial love, one of the things that I'm kind of questioning within myself is what story is actually mine to tell. And that's a very hard one because in theory, it is our story.
Yeah.
Because we are a plant in the family garden. We are a part of it. But on the other hand, sometimes I think to myself, is this lens or this narrative that I'm telling truly what I should be sharing? And if it's truly the lens that I should be sharing, what am I hoping people can take from it? Especially if we're talking about like betrayal and absence of family members or childhood neglect, these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Well, what can we bring to people where, because a lot of people, I think one of the things I've realized as being a writer is that we're not alone.
Absolutely.
That is probably the first lesson I realized in writing and in sharing writing, is that no matter what you think you went through, you are not alone.
Yeah.
And so when we share these stories, especially we all have complicated relationships with family.
Yeah.
How do we give something to people where they can then go back and reflect on their lives? Because we're not just sharing our stories just to share the stories. The stories also live in people because it's their lives too.
Yeah. Ooh,
It's their lives too.
yeah.
So I think one of the things we have to consider is the responsibility then that we have is that when we're sharing our stories, that we're also touching on the lives of others too.
Word. That's beautiful. Okay, so my last question around writing about familial love, um, or I guess like platonic love, friendship,
Yes.
um, those all kind of eventually fall in the same wheelhouse, is where do you, because we can write about like fallout and we'll touch on that a little bit more, but where do you write safely for yourself? Not talking about sharing at this point, but where do you give your write safely for yourself as you're writing for yourself to navigate these experiences? Because I don't want to just think about releases. For you young folks out there, it's important to write for you on your own time.
Yeah.
And Fatima talked about that a little earlier. So, like, I guess my follow up question for you would be like, when you're writing about these things, it's easy to kind of trigger yourself or to over embellish the good um, when we're talking about it. So, how do we keep ourselves kind of in check and in alignment with our stories? Is it necessary? Because I want to check my bias too. Is it necessary for us to keep ourselves safe in those regards when we're exploring our work by ourselves? Are there ways you practice that?
Mm, good question. Um, I give myself a lot of time to be alone, an incredible amount of time to be alone. And it is only through that solitude that I can figure out my own understandings of what it means to write in safety. One of the things I don't think the brain can trick itself. I don't necessarily think that you can lie to yourself. Um, I mean, positive affirmations are great. They're great and they're important and they're necessary. But if you are in the thick of your sadness, maybe you are in the thick of your sadness,
Yeah.
and it's okay. Because I think that it is possible if we are capable of triggering other people, we are also capable of triggering ourselves. Um, I give myself breaks, but I won't go from writing and then watching TV and then going coming back to the writing. My break might just be soft music is playing in the background and I'm sitting in the feeling, like literally doing nothing. I think one of the things that has helped me the most in my writing is when I do nothing. Like
Word.
nothing. I'm just laying down in grass or I'm just sitting down in my room or I'm the ways that I have made a commitment to minimize the noise in my life. So I've talked to you about this before, like
Yeah. It's okay. It's for that.
social media, like not being on social media, um, just really being mindful of the things that I'm digesting, media wise, news wise. Um, these are all helping me be in the nothingness and be in the silence,
Yeah.
trying the best to be in the silence. And I cry if I need to. I hold myself if I need to. I don't write if that's what my body's calling me to do. I don't force anything. I let it come be through me. If we really believe that creativity and imagination belongs to this ether, I heard this story once that when Michael Jackson gets a song idea, he rushes to the studio because he doesn't want God to give it to Prince. So it's like if this creativity and this imagination, if it's all among the same ether and we're all connected to it, we can take breaks. I don't think we have to be worried about anyone else taking our ideas. Yeah,
Word.
don't be worried about people taking your ideas. That was just a MJ Prince rivalry. Yeah, I hope that answers your
Yeah,
question.
it's good. It's good. Let's hope this keeps working. So I think the next part of this conversation for me is how do we navigate writing about love when tragedy does strike, when the real hard stuff of love comes up. What was it? What was
Yeah,
it that they said in? Did you watch WandaVision?
I did.
What is it? Grief is love.
Persevering.
Yeah, grief is just what is grief, but not love persevering. Bars. I heard that shit and I was
Oh yeah.
in tears.
Yeah.
And I think it's a beautiful way to think about grief. But as someone who's in the midst of grieving still, like I'm grieving the loss of like a handful of people over the course of the last couple of years, and the difficulty I've had in like processing that. Um, I have a friend. I won't say his name, but he died in 2020, and this year was the first year. Um, no, that's not true. End of 2022, I wrote about him for real for the first time, and it was just two sentences. Last I seen my dog, we was at his viewing. Fly up his nostril and still not moving, and like I haven't moved past the like seeing his body, like that grief. I still have yet to pass that hurdle, and it's been 3 years. And so, in terms of writing about grief and moving through grief, how do you find the where do you gather up your strength from when you're writing from a place of grief?
First of all, that's a beautiful poem. The two sentences you shared. I think the writers of WandaVision really got it right. That grief is love persevering, and it's doing its very best to stay alive.
Yeah.
That the love is doing its best to stay alive, although the thing that you love or the person that you love is no longer in your life.
Yeah.
Their presence might be dead, but the feeling is still there. And so your body's really it's working in overtime to keep the love alive. There's this scene in Fleabag where it's so good. You should watch Fleabag. It's a really good show, and the main character is dealing with the loss of a dear loved one, a loss of her best friend, and also the loss of her mother. And she's like, "What do I do with all this grief?" And I think it's a question that we answer in our writing. What do we do with all this grief? And what do we do with all this love that we're persevering? I think right now in my writing, I have been writing a lot about persevering the love in romantic relationships. And for a long time that has been like a no-no for me. I'm like, nope, absolutely not. Me being heartbroken, yeah, that's a private practice and not a public ceremony. Because when we are sharing these grief love ceremonies, it's a public ceremony.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing and okay with one, bearing yourself in that kind of way, and then two, you also have to accept the responsibility of how this makes your community feel, especially for those of us who are spoken word artists, and who are sharing our words publicly. Sometimes poetry, like prose, people kind of deal with themselves in a room where the responsibilities it's still there, but it's like this private there's a boundary between like kind of your responsibility, whereas as a public speaker you have a lot more at stake. And so it's one of the things I'm trying to do as well with my writing, especially when I'm talking about grief in the romantic sense, is baby, this is what I say to myself: stop writing like you're a lead in the tragedy. Stop. Sometimes you can, and you're allowed to, but I have so many poems where I'm the lead in this tragedy of love. And sometimes it's important. Actually, it's really important. I can't even downplay it. It's really important. Because yeah, like if we've been betrayed or neglected or not loved to the ways that we deserved to be loved, it's earth shattering.
Word.
It's earth shattering.
Word. That was what a way to end a question. Okay, so we're talking about this is still working sick. We're talking about when you talk about something being earth shattering. I think one of the things I fail at when I'm writing about something that feels like it's the end of the world is letting myself feel like really get into that feeling. And then the other thing I fail at is then properly navigating it, navigating my way through. And when you mentioned that our sharing in public is public ceremony, I think we forget our place sometimes as poets, that we have a function and a role in society.
One of
And
the
it's
most important.
I completely agree, and it's devalued so much. Sometimes I think we forget that
Yes.
we're the carriers. What do I tell people? That poetry is the translation of the human soul and experience.
Wow.
And so, when you have the opportunity to write about these things, you're not simply, sharing a feeling. You're telling people how it goes, and most people don't have capacity to say these things for themselves. In that, for Black writers, and I want to get specific now, for us as Black writers, we have kind of this burden of responsibility to navigate these things, and like people ask us to navigate oppression all the time, right? And it's annoying because we only understand depression because we're under it and we understand it to survive. But I think heartbreak and loss of love is a totally different thing that we do need to navigate. And I say that mostly because as Black people, we spend so much time not showing up in the emotional capacity that is vulnerability because we don't have the space to be vulnerable. The point I'm trying to get to in this long-winded rant is that we often, as Black writers, take up the responsibility of our sadness collectively by individually navigating our experiences. So I guess my question would be, how do you, as a Black writer, I'll go as far as to say even as a Black woman who writes, how do you navigate the space of being vulnerable enough to share your grief?
Good question. I think, well, first and foremost, for all Black writers, the hurdle that we're all going to have to go through is that Black pain is profitable.
Yeah.
It is something that particularly our white audiences, either they are looking forward to that kind of story, expecting it, or are over it.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but they're just over it. So I think, again, the question is, well, if you're writing about this Black pain, who is it for?
Word.
Are you white? Are you writing it for a white audience? Be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
It's okay. If that's your intent, maybe it's for educational purposes or whatever it is. I'm not necessarily interested or that concerned about the white gaze in my writing.
We're the same in that regard.
Yeah, I'm like, if you enjoy it, if you take something from it, sure, but you are not my primary audience. You can be a part of the audience, but you're not my primary audience. I also kind of fear that when we take up Black stories, that it's almost always rooted in an oppressive lens.
Yeah.
And I guess in my life, the racism that personally, on a personal note, that I experience is microaggressions. It's very, very, it's almost like sometimes I'm like, can I consider this racism or not? Like it's so subtle. It's so subtle. It's not overt and it's not in your face. And I think it kind of shows up in my writing too, that it's very subtle. It's almost like a line or two, or it's through inferences, or it's not the main thing.
Yeah.
Because I think it's also true for my life. It's like sometimes you watch these films and all day racism. I'm like, my life is not all day racism. You know what I mean? It's like sprinkle sprinkle here and
Yeah.
there, but it's not all day.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, like, when it shows up in my writing, it's kind of very much like the roots underneath the tree. It exists and it's there, but you wouldn't see it at face value. It's kind of it's in between the lines.
Yeah. Word. I guess. No, it's at 5 minutes. I'm gonna stop it. So I guess this will be my last question. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you
I
for
appreciate.
having me.
I'm gonna thank you again afterwards, but like, thank you. Um, it's been insightful. You've given me some things to think about, which is nice. I have some things to think about when I go in right next. I guess my last question would be: you and I think a good chunk of our friendship kind of operates in this way that like we understand our friendship as artists. Let me rephrase: our friendship as artists, and my appreciation for you as an artist. And I think you feel the same way about me. I'm assuming,
Absolutely.
assuming, but like we really write for our people,
Yes.
and we write with the intention to care for us and to love ourselves, but also to love our people,
Yes.
right? So in that, um, I guess the alternate side of that, like as a follow up to the last question, is like how do you navigate the vulnerability for us? So like in a crowd that like I'm reading primarily to black people, or primarily black people are going to hear this, or primarily black people are going to be uh, in the audience. How do you navigate holding that open space? Um, I know for me, I have a hard time navigating it for black men because like I know the emotional work I've done. Like I'm nowhere near perfect. I have a lot of growing to do as a man still, but a lot of men aren't even open to going to that place in conversations with their closest friends sometimes. And I hold that responsibility close because like I need space to be bold for my brothers,
Yes, yes, yes.
and I need space to be bold enough for like my sisters, my friends, um, to my siblings, my non-binary folk. Like there needs to be black men willing to go to that space so that they can see it's possible. Um, and then I need to be willing to go to that space so that I can continue to do it. And so, how do you navigate that? Because a lot of people see it as weakness, and we know it's not. We know it's strength. Um, but like the difference between opening yourself up to being open and opening yourself up to being vulnerable
Yes.
are two different
Two very
spaces.
different things.
So, how do you navigate that for us?
Mm. For us, well, I mean, I think we have the most beautiful lives.
Yeah.
We have the most beautiful lives. Given the legacy that we all come from, whether it's we all have different legacies and where we've come from and how our ancestors all wounded up here, how we all wounded up in this space together, this time and place together. We have some of the most beautiful lives because we've been hurt,
Mm.
and because we have all this grief, and because people continue to hurt us. But we also love each other. And we really, when we go in for each other, like Alabama, like when we go in for each other, we go in for each other.
Yeah.
And so I think that sometimes when I write, I have to remember I'm competing with the beauty of Black people's lives in my writing.
Come on. Come on. Say that again.
But
Say
wait,
that again.
I'm competing with the beauty of Black people's lives in my writing.
Yeah.
And so, in competing with this beauty, I'm also competing with their grief too. It's one and the same. It's the same coin. And so, when I'm doing this, I think we have to remember too, especially writing for Black audiences and writing as Black artists. Are you interested in mimicking life? Because if you are interested in mimicking life, you are being a politician.
Yeah.
Or are you interested in creating new meaning and new realities? Because now we're moving into how art is used as a revolutionary tool, how art is used to be able to push the boundaries, and how art is able to save our lives.
Mhm.
I think that sometimes I get caught. I'm not even going to lie. I have shared a lot of grief stories.
Mhm.
Like that, I'm not going to even deny.
Mhm.
But I think that it's the one and the same coin, and there's no way that we can pull them apart from each other. That I think one of our jobs now as like new generation writers is that we do have like this new, even though we're young, we're still young.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 30
30,
young.
30's not old. 30's not old.
We're still young, but we are going to become elders.
Yes.
And to keep this in mind for even the younger artists that are kind of looking at our work and
Mhm.
maybe competing with the beauty and the grief of the audience's lives in their own sharing. How do we take care of ourselves? How do we take care of our audiences, particularly our Black audience? Um, and what does our freedom look like? A lot of the time, we've talked about resiliency,
Mhm.
which I love.
Yeah, but it's not freedom.
No, it's
It's not
not freedom.
freedom.
It's not freedom.
Yeah.
And I'm right now, I'm really interested in freedom. The interesting tie, though, now is that as I'm becoming more of both an open and vulnerable artist, I'm
Yeah.
realizing that it's starting to seep into my personal life. That now I'm more interested
Word.
in being an open and vulnerable person. Um, yeah, you would never catch me crying in front of people
Yeah.
unless it was on stage. For whatever reason, when
Mhm.
I'm in the moment and sharing a story, I can tap into that. But Scribe, I'm telling you, for a long time, you can ask a lot of people, they would not say that they've seen me cry.
Yeah.
Um,
If I could count, it would be on less than a hand.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be that person that always tries to be strong or tries to be resilient. I think a part of my freedom right now is also being soft and tender and messy.
Hmm.
That's another part for me too. And I'm seeing that my writing is a little bit messy, which I don't mind.
Add
Which
some
I don't
juice. Yeah,
mind.
add some
Which I
juice.
don't mind. Which I don't
Mhm.
mind. So I think my takeaway with that with anyone who's listening to this, and you really love your audience and you want to make do, you want to give credit to your audience. How do you? I guess a question for you, all of you listening, is well, how do I write and make people feel a little bit better about themselves than they did before
Word.
they walked in?
Yeah.
Because usually with Black writing, people are walking away like this.
Feeling deflated and.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, how do we write so that people are walking away feeling a little bit better than when they walked in?
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. Uh, to all of you out there, I hope you enjoyed this interview. It was filled with beautiful answers and beautiful people because there's two of us here. And
I love that. Yes.
and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. I'll see you soon.